Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to you all. Here at St. Anthony, we are gathered with our Superintendent Joan Carr, our Assistant Superintendents Tim Kuzak and Pat Lemma, many of our district office staff, as well as the admin team and teachers from St. Paul, and our presenter Myron Dueck. I'm Suzanne Soika, the manager of Tranform Professional Learning, and we hope that you are comfortable in your setting. Let's begin with a Lenten prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. Dear Lord, as we go about our lives, the press of our duties and activities sometimes leads us to forget your presence and your love. In this holy season of Lent, help us to turn our minds and hearts towards you. Help us to remember that we are sinners, but even more, help us to remember your loving mercy. Lead us into sincere repentance and bless our efforts with the rich blessing of your grace. Bring us refreshed and renewed to the celebration of Christ's resurrection at Easter. We ask this through your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Myron Dueck to Edmonton Catholic Schools. Myron is a Canadian teacher, assistant principal, leader, international speaker, author, facilitator, truly an educator with a real focus on the role of assessment and grading in student learning. We are blessed with his practical knowledge and experience, as well as his thoughtfulness for the progress and well-being of every learner. At the conclusion of our formal presentation today, Myron will engage in a question and answer dialogue. So please join me in welcoming Myron.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and certainly a learning experience for me with the format, both having had a chat this morning with administrators from your district, and then having this simulcast through a bunch of schools. I'm looking forward to it. So because of our time, and I'll say this maybe a few times, this will move relatively quickly because there's a fair bit we have to cover. More importantly, probably than ever, if we're going to have multiple sites going on, I want people to know that I encourage and support and welcome a Twitter back channel, that whether that's in this room, people are having a dialogue on the back end as to what this means for them or the school or what they're thinking, including from site to site. It might be a way for people to connect with you in this room, even though they're at a school someplace else. So a big thanks to Suzanne for organizing this, and wherever Rhonda is out there. I recall a phone call when I was walking through Seattle Airport about a year ago saying, could you commit to a February date in Edmonton? So it's a pleasure. I occupy a space on this globe in Summerland, right about there. And it's nice to get over here, only a 1 hour flight or so from Kelowna. And I want to share a little bit of who I am. So one of the roles I have filled and currently fill is that of a teacher. I've taught for 18 years in 3 different jurisdictions, Manitoba, New Zealand, and now British Columbia, in both the private and independent school system and the public. Range in experience from grades 4 to 12, and multiple courses, and certainly high content, high stakes provincial exam courses. I'm currently teaching 25% load in my high school, and the other part of my job is I'm a vice principal. I have the pleasure of bringing my dog to school from time to time, especially at exam time. Ryder, the Labradoodle, sits beside students who are either, particularly anxious about their testing experience. He seems to find them, and they find him. One of the other roles that I fill is I'm a district assessment leader. We're running an inquiry group right now on the topic of assessment with people from elementary, middle, and high, and I'm going to show some of the examples of some work we've been doing with that group and some of the results. And this other part of my life, we would have to go back to 2006 when my principal said to me, hey Myron, you want to go to a grading conference in Portland? I was like, no, not really. Thanks though. And he said, no, it'll be good. It'll be grading. I said, yeah, no, you mentioned grading. Yeah, it sounds delightful. I'm sure it'll be riveting. But I'm good, thank you. My grades are fine. My courses are going fine. And he says, well, we are heading out to a Trailblazers game, and we're going to head out for some dinners. I said, oh, grading conference. Oh, I've been wanting to go to a grading conference for quite some time now. So I went to Portland, and Rick Stiggins was the opening keynote. I was at the back of the room, maybe looking up furniture at IKEA, I don't know. But I was not all that thrilled about being at the grading conference itself until Rick Stiggins stood up, and in his keynote he said, your students should be able to answer 3 questions. Where are we going? And once you've done some of the learning and assessment, they should be able to answer, where am I now? And thirdly, what are you doing about closing that gap between where you wanted to go and where you find yourself if you're short of that goal or that destination? And I remember kind of closing my laptop for a second and saying, I've never heard it phrased that way. And I don't know that I'm doing a very good job of indicating any of those things or working with that with my students. A year later, I was there presenting on the topic of unit plans. I said, I've been trying to build unit plans in my history class, and I presented a half session there, and a gentleman from Port Alberni Secondary School came up to me and said, would you want to come to my high school and share what you're doing? No, I don't think so. I'm just a high school history teacher who's trying to figure this out. And he said, so I went back, my principal said, you should go, you should really go. Next, the University of Kentucky called and said, we hear you're kind of this, you know something about unit plans, you're kind of an expert in BC. And I said, I don't think I'm an expert. Well, we got your name from this conference, would you come to present at the University of Kentucky on unit plans? Yeah, sure, always wanted to go to Kentucky, I hear the grass is green, sure. And then it just went like this. I only put those things up there to let you know that I've had the pleasure of visiting and meeting with many educators. Now it's been globally. And this has grown for me, this experience. And it doesn't matter where you go, the same teachers have some of the same concerns and they're dealing with the same things, okay? The person I probably most need to thank for the fact that I put a book out is a woman from Bahrain who came up to me in Greece and said, I have big homework problems too. I said, what are they? I teach in a private school. BP Oil runs it. All the families are very wealthy. I think the tutors are doing the homework. Even here, there's homework issues. And you know what? It was on the 10-hour flight home from Athens that I wrote the chapter on homework. And I sent it to ASCD, and they said, I think there's a project here. I didn't even get her name, but she's the one to thank, I think, for a book that's out there. I have a much more important role than any of the ones I've so far mentioned, and that is being a dad. We're big Star Wars fans. My kids mean everything to me. My wife is tremendously supportive of what I do on the road. And when I think about my family, I think that one thing is absolutely critical that I point out. This picture here was from the first day of school this year. And what I'm going to talk about today is what I want for my own son and daughter. Okay? This is not about somebody else's kids and what I think you should do with someone else's kids. That mine are reserved for this space or that space and that there's certain rules for certain kids. No, I'm talking about Elijah and Sloan today. And I also want to point out that I hear other teachers talk about their own kids, and I will say this. In my travels, I've bumped into people who are staunchly against certain grading practices until it's their own kids. And then all of a sudden they have more of an ear for retesting because, no, you have to understand it's my son. He's dealing with a lot of things right now. I said, yeah, what about everybody else's sons? And maybe that's a connection we have to make, that it's our own kids and it's everybody's kids. So back to this presentation. This is not what I'm trying to achieve today. I'm not trying to have this be an experience where you're going to feel like you're drinking water from a fire hose. But it's going to go pretty quick. I'm not going to probably take a lot of questions here because I want to stick to that hour and 15 framework, and we have a lot of things to cover. But afterwards, as Suzanne pointed out, I'll gladly stick around to take questions, and I understand we're keeping the cameras going for that too. In light of that, I want everybody to understand that this is going to be a survey of a number of things we've tried and some of the bigger ideas. And if you're after some of those details you can find in the book and you can find online. We can have more of a conversation, but we're going to treat this as a survey with maybe conversations to follow. I hope to be a part of those. I am convinced that you must lead with why before you tell people how. And I know there's differing views on this. There are people who say, no, I think we should cover the how and then we'll get into the why. I'm a believer that you have to underpin the purpose for what you're doing, and I want to try to cover that today. Realizing we don't have tons of time to establish the why on every one of the topics we're doing today, because each of those would take an hour or two on their own. So I want you to keep that in mind. So here we go. First of all, a little bit of context from me. I have some rules I try to abide by. One of those rules is that leveling academic threats at students already failing might not be super effective. Okay? Walking up to people and say, excuse you, you might fail if you keep this up. Should he respond, I already am, that threat is going to lose much of its power. So when you're dealing with struggling learners, academic threats don't always work very well. I wonder if people would agree with that. Rule number 2. We need to widen the window through which students can demonstrate understanding, demonstrate knowledge, demonstrate competency. And if you only need to look around globally at what's happening with education to realize it's not just about pen to paper with lines on it. It is broadening beyond that. Rule number 3, we must have relationships be the core as to what we do in schools, because when you're teaching human beings, relationships are paramount. And it's brain researchers like John Medina that'll point that out. That is the trigger, that's the window, that's the catalyst to get a human being to say, okay, I will learn from your facilitation. I'm going to use this next slide, a cartoon, to present the case. I believe rule number 4 is we are all in this together. And I think this cartoonist did it well. It looks like neither one of us is very good at what we do. Since seeing this cartoon, I'm always reminded of it when a teacher comes up and tells me how his or her students did on a recent assessment. And say that again? My students did like this on a recent assessment. As though they are not a part of that conversation. Maybe that's how we did on that assessment. Because I think we all have something to own. We like to own our top students. Do we own the ones that struggle? Rule number 5. I think we need to establish environments in which students gain confidence and deal with less stress, anxiety, and confusion. That's a very important piece for me, and some of the tools I want to share with you today, I think, do that. And number 6, I just added this one. It used to be 5 rules I go by. Well, I needed to add this thing. More and more, everywhere I travel, it's becoming about competencies over content. And this is, I'm bumping into it everywhere I go. And this whole notion of competencies, if you focus on those competencies, the ones in British Columbia, which I'll share, don't look much different from those in Alberta, don't look much different than the ones I just saw in Wisconsin, and ones I bumped into in Rio. And there are things like this. These are the British Columbia version right now, the pillars. But again, do those look dissimilar to the overall competencies you're looking at in Alberta? No. Yours is often represented by a circle with numeracy, literacy, technology awareness. But there's creative thinking, critical thinking. Like I say, globally, they're there. So what is it about these competencies? I think if we took the competencies and treated them like, okay, this is the center of what we do. It's the location on our journey. It's where we're going. Content is how we'll get there. It's the vehicle. So if somebody says, well, I teach science, I said, that's great. Then we are facilitating and we're creating critical thinking in science. If I teach automotive, then I'm looking for technicians that will look critically at an engine failure and say, what happened here? Not run for the closest manual and say, I can look it up on page 42. And whether that's art, sciences, humanities, whatever, content is the vehicle to get to the competencies. So every once in a while you get the canaries in the coal mine. And here's one I want to share today, and I bumped into this in an article in the New York Times with Laszlo Bock. I don't know if you're familiar with this article, but they asked him, so what about hiring people at Google? I mean, you guys used to famously ask everyone for their transcript and their GPAs, and I understand you're going away from GPAs, is that right? He goes, yes, we are. Here's why. Your ability to perform at Google is completely unrelated to how you performed when you were in school. That should be something that concerns us in schools. That if you have a high GPA, that in many ways may hurt your chances of being hired at Google. If you walk in with a mediocre GPA and you can try to explain your way out of that one, they're interested in hearing from you. Because these people aren't the ones who are being successful. How Laszlo Bock feels is academic environments are artificial, and the kind of people we're after are people who like figuring out stuff where there's no obvious answer. And I think that requires us to go up what Bloom's was talking about, to go away from just knowledge and definitions and describe something that anybody could look up on their phone, to justification, inquiry, all the pieces that make for deeper learning and deeper learning experiences. Here's another canary in the coal mine. This is maybe a little more concrete. I don't know if you've ever heard of MIT. It's some little upstart school in the Northeast. Okay? Anybody can get in as long as they have an incredibly high score in high school and they look like they're going to be a very, very good student. But there's something that's interesting about MIT. If you go to their grading policies, I think this is important for people to notice who say, but the universities. We can't change what we're doing in our schools because the universities, because the universities, because the universities. Yeah, let's look at the universities. And let's start with MIT. If you go to MIT's website and you look up incomplete work or freshman grading, you will find things like this. You will find that when you get to MIT in the first semester as a freshman, you will either pass or there will be no record whatsoever that you ever took that course. Like, we never had this conversation. These are the students who are coming from all over the world as being the most resilient, the most responsible, the learner who went across the stage and picked up all the awards. And once you get to your second semester, they up it a little bit. You can get an A, B, C, or no record this ever occurred. You can't fail. You can't fail as a freshman at MIT. Why are they doing this? They're doing it so that freshman grading is designed to ease the transition from high school. And everywhere I go, remember that slide, I visit a lot of schools. I have yet to see a middle school do a transitional period of grading for people entering the middle school. I have yet to see a high school say to their grade 9s or their freshmen in the United States, hey, we're going to use a pass or no record basis for the first month. I've yet to see it. Never seen it, never heard of it. But MIT does that for the top grads in the country. And only when you get to your second year are they going to move to A, B, C, and finally Fs. So it makes me wonder if we can do that for the most successful grads in the world. I wonder why we're so hesitant to do that for some of our most struggling learners, or maybe that's a conversation we need to have. But the next time somebody tells you, but the universities, maybe you'll have some of this in your head. So the map today looks a bit like this. I want to start with targets. Anytime somebody asks me, hey, where do you think we should start with this whole thing? I always say targets. And once we cover targets, what I did is I moved to quality assessments that give me data on whether or not the targets are being met. And this creates an information loop. This creates a feedback loop for the teacher that once you set the targets and once you get actual data back from those targets, then what's the natural outcome? You know where your students are strong, where they're struggling. You might even know where you as a teacher are strong or where you're struggling. And the natural outcome is that you move towards a better quality of instruction. And I'm going to show you in a minute how that worked for me. Once I built targets, I thought, that's it, I'm done. I built clear targets. That's what I set out to do after the grading conference. Got it. And then it's like, well, how are we doing on the targets? My tests don't indicate that. My tests are a conglomeration of all the learning outcomes together. Okay, I'll split those up into topics. Great, I'm done. But no. Then I looked over at my grades, and I found that I wasn't reporting what was actually happening in my classroom. because I was throwing in late deductions. I was throwing in zeros. I was throwing in those kinds of things. And that's the time I looked over at my grading. So when people in schools often want to lead a conversation with grading, there are administrators who call me and say, I got a bit of a problem in my school with grading. The first thing I ask is, did you lead with a grading change? Yes. Let me guess, zeros. We wanted to ban zeros. Yeah, that's not the place to start the conversation. People have to understand why they might want to make a grading change based on how their students are doing on the targets. I wouldn't lead with grades. So what did Rick Stiggins say? Essentially this. There are 3 critical questions. So where are we going? And we're going to start with that today, with targets. Then where am I now? Those quality assessments. And then how would I close the gap? Where's the place for reassessments, perhaps in your schools or your district? And I'm going to share with you 3 examples of how we're trying them in our high school right now. So here we go. I think if I did the book all over again, I would change chapter 3 to read chapter 1, because people have asked me, if you think unit plans are so important, if targets are so important, why wasn't that the first chapter? I usually say it should have been. It's kind of late now. I think it's pretty hard to find people who say targets aren't useful. It's pretty hard. If you're a golfer, the flag would have a certain degree of relevance for you. If you're a pilot landing a plane in the dark, the runway lights are really, really helpful. If you want to try an activity with teachers or students, try this one. Buy a bunch of puzzles, dump the puzzle pieces into Ziploc bags, and then just put people together at tables with the puzzle pieces dumped on the table and say, away you go. See how well you do with a puzzle if you can't see the picture. And that's one way of having it dawn on people, I think the targets matter quite a lot. So I do this with my leadership students for other reasons. I got the idea from a teacher who's using it in science. We talk about patterns. That's an interesting idea. But it sure illustrates the value of a target. So what did I do for my students around this topic, where are we going? Well, the first thing I ever did is I built unit plans, and I built them on the castle work of Stiggins, Arter, Chapuis, and Chapuis. And it looks like this. My student-friendly unit plans are split between I can statements and make sure they're student-friendly. Students have to understand what those targets are. And then, looking at their work, I split it into 4 sections. What do you need to know? What do you need to reason? What do you need to demonstrate? And what do you need to produce? And for virtually any course out there, any subject out there, the learning outcomes can be divided among those 4 things. So recently I was working with a group in Wisconsin, and they said we would like to spend the morning just building learning targets. What can we do with that? So I said, how well do you think your teachers have a harness on the command terms? The what? The command terms. You lost me. I said, okay, well, that's where we're going to start. I don't know what you call them in Wisconsin, but in British Columbia, a lot of our provincial exams are called command terms. And if you do a Google search on command terms, there's going to be either images or text. And if you click on images, you're going to see things like this. You're going to see the triangle that Bloom's was talking about, Bloom's taxonomy, where you have knowledge pieces at the bottom, where you're going to see things like identify, define, outline, state, describe, things you could look up on your phone. But as you go up to different command terms, such as you go up to calculate, and then up to explain, to analyze, to justify, to formulate, you are going further and further up the command term chain where you're getting into deeper learning. And I think that's what Laszlo Bock is referring to when he says we need people who can figure out stuff where there's no obvious answer. We don't need everybody hanging out at the bottom of the triangle. And you need much more evidence that when you're sitting around the table now, it isn't all that wonderful if you can rattle off the last 10 places the Olympics were. Because anybody can look that up. analysis, creativity, that's where it's going. So back to command terms. What I did with this group is I sought to take the command terms that I've used or seen and split them up by category. So if you're looking at knowledge targets, it's going to be things like classify, define, describe, the sort of things you see there. And when you move to reason, it's the command term that's going to get you started on the learning target in that area. So if you see things like argue or evaluate or to what extent, you're now into the reasoning part. You're going further up that triangle. Well, how would people demonstrate their understanding? Well, it would be command terms like this: prove, solve, sketch, show. Those sorts of pieces. And finally, when it comes to products, product criteria, the product part of the unit plan is what will someone deliver? What will they bring in? That's where you're looking for things like, well, can you construct, design, document, etc.? And then you can also talk about the various forms it comes in. There's so many ways of showing understanding. There's so many ways that are engaging. And I think that's where education is heading. Well, I know it is. You see it everywhere. So this forms the backbone. It forms the basis of this whole topic on unit plans. Now let's dive into one specifically that would be from my History 12 course a few years ago. I can list and describe Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So my students, first of all, they need to understand the command terms. Somebody asked this morning, I believe her name was Jane. Jane asked, what would you do with those command terms? Would you, in a sense, teach them? Absolutely. Your students are going to need to know what list and describe mean. They're going to need to know what justify means. So you treat the command terms like they're the content of the course also, because they're absolutely essential for students to understand. The first assessment you do, maybe you walk students through where are the command terms, highlight them, and does everybody know what I'm asking for with those command terms? Practice and learn it. So back to this one, list and describe Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. So we got Woodrow Wilson and we have his 14 points where he was trying to avoid wars in the future. Now the question for you guys is this a knowledge or reasoning target? What is it? Make a commitment to someone beside you. Knowledge or reasoning, and why? All right. Any consensus out there? Knowledge. What's the giveaway? Okay. So you take a knowledge target, it's list and describe. Could you look it up on your phone? Yep. Easy. So let's go to another one. I can list and describe the conditions placed on Germany at the Treaty of Versailles, where they took away territory, they took away weapons, and they made Germany pay reparations. Knowledge or reasoning? For sure. Has to be list and describe. Now let's be clear. The entire first page of my unit plan for this Paris Peace Conference unit is knowledge targets. They're very important. But I think the reason they're so important is so that you can do something with them. So check this out. If you go to knowledge target and you combine those, you get to this. I can evaluate to what extent Wilson's 14 points are reflected in the Treaty of Versailles. So where did they listen to Wilson and where didn't they? Knowledge or reasoning? Evaluate to what extent? It is certainly a higher order thinking activity to answer this question than the two previous. So what I often challenge teachers about is, a teacher recently sent me a test. I'd been on the road and they said, here's my unit test. Just give me your honest opinion. And it was on Greek mythology, and I paged through it, and it was entirely Trivial Pursuit questions. Who was this figure? What does this mean? And I kept looking, going, what an incredible topic to get into some reasoning or some deeper thinking. Where do you think the symbolism is here? What are they trying to get at with this? None of it was there. So I wrote her back and said, this is what I think. You need to go into the deeper end of the pool a little bit. So what does it look like in my class? It looks like this. There's page 1. We'll go back, sorry. There's page 1 of the unit plan. Those are all knowledge targets. Definitions, important figures, what are Wilson's 14 points, etc. Then, the second page is split between the 3 sections of what you will do with your knowledge. And if you look at that very first one, and I'll make it a little bigger there, it's that same learning target we just saw. And it takes 2 knowledge components and tries to blend them. And when my students first see a unit plan, here's how I explain it. If this was a recipe, there's the ingredients, and the second page is what you do with the ingredients. And let's be clear, the Red Seal chefs out there are not the people who are super good at shopping for groceries. Okay? Anybody can compile the ingredients as long as they know where to shop. It's what you do with the ingredients that will set you apart from the average chef or the average historian. For elementary teachers, I recently got cornered by 2 elementary teachers at a conference who said, your examples are all secondary. You don't understand elementary folks, you secondary history teacher. So I built this. This is what I think, I actually built it somewhat in conjunction with my daughter Sloan, who's in grade 4. Sloan, does this make sense to you? Oh yeah. It's what I put into my brain, then what I will do with what I've put in my brain, and finally what I will make or demonstrate to show my learning and my understanding. So this is being used at a whole bunch of elementary schools now, and it's just my attempt at saying, okay, I get there's different needs at different levels. So of course I want to reiterate, and Suzanne and I know have done this, these can be sent out electronically, these documents, and also people should have those packages, but there's no reason why you can't get your hands on any template here that you see today. So what did my students say in response to these things? Well, this is one. Man, this was a huge help. I'm able to focus my studying and figure out what I know and don't know before I write the test. And it was student feedback that put wind in my sails to keep going. So like I said to you guys, I thought I was finished when I made learning targets. I started making unit plans for all these different courses, and I said, that's it. But once you set your targets clearly, wouldn't it be nice to know if you're meeting them? You can walk around all day and say, I got great learning targets. They're awesome. Yeah, categories, everything. Knowledge, reasoning. I'm proud of them. How are you doing on those targets? I don't know. But they're great targets. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. Nobody else would do that. So, let's get on to the next step. How will you design assessments that would let you know how you're doing on the targets? Here's what I did. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what would good feedback look like? Dylan Willem talks about it being timely, specific, and accurate. I would add meaningful, personal, and relevant. And if you want to see a good document out there, and I don't always say this about government documents, but I would suggest that you Google, Principles of Quality Assessment, BC Ed. It's a recent document put out by the government in British Columbia through consultation with people in the assessment realm to say, here are, 9 or 10 bullets it looks like, maybe 8, of what would good assessment look like. And you're going to see terms in there like it involves students in their learning. It provides ongoing descriptive feedback to students. Communicates clearly to the learner and their parents as to how they're doing. I strongly recommend you have a look at that document. Many of the things I'm going to share today are going to be reflected in the timeliness, the specific nature, and other things you see there with feedback. Which brings us to the next topic. So let's just put feedback over there right now. Okay? And your name again?
Tim.
Tim. Okay. So I'm going to use Tim as an example. Let's say Tim and I go for coffee after this, and Tim says to me, "Hey, Myron." "What, Tim?" "I just learned to ride the unicycle." "That's great. When did you learn?" And he says, "Last Saturday." So let me get this clear, Tim. 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have known how to ride the unicycle. Okay, and it was so last Saturday at 12 o'clock. Okay, great. Now, let's say we're at a restaurant or wherever, coffee shop, and we're having coffee, and I say, "Tim, don't get me wrong, I'm proud of you. Yeah, that unicycle stuff, that must be tough. Good job. But before you feel too proud, may I just remind you that 2 weeks ago, you didn't know how to ride a unicycle. So don't get me wrong, and all the people around the table, we're proud of Tim, right? Go get him, Tim. But just keep reminding him that 2 weeks ago, for the record, he did not know how to ride a unicycle. And you guys at the other tables near here, now that you've been eavesdropping, feel free to congratulate him, but remind him 2 weeks ago. Didn't know how, Tim. Okay. Otherwise, good job. Yeah. Now if this is how I acted, and sometimes I do, it would underscore why my wife says, "Myron, we don't have a lot of friends left." Because when has it ever been relevant that you used to not be able to do something? Where in conversation is that relevant? Who would say that to somebody who just learned to ride the unicycle and demonstrated that knowledge and understanding and that ability? Fact is, we do that in our grade books all the time. I will continue to blend the unicycle quiz from 2 weeks ago into your grade. Why? Because back then you didn't know how to do it. Hey man, I've seen you've shown recent understanding, and that's wonderful. But 2 weeks ago you didn't, and I'm going to continue to blend it. Okay? That is where the conversation comes between when and if. We don't do it in other places in life. It's funny that we do it in grade books. Well, not actually that funny. I also find that when and if varies by instructional grade level a lot of the time. If I'm going to have a difficult conversation around the topic of when and if, it seems that high schools are a little bit more weighted towards the when. And I find that elementary levels are more leaning towards the if. It's one of the differences we have. If you want to look at the video game industry, we go back to feedback. And when and if. You know what they provide for the user? They provide immediate feedback, they provide specific feedback, and they blur the lines of when and if by saying we'll give you the opportunity to adapt to that feedback over and over and over again. The gaming industry would be dead in the water if it stopped providing these things. So let's go back to the questions. Student choice on retesting. So where am I now? Am I missing the target? And if I am, how do I close the gap to bring myself back onto target? And this brings us back to our diagram. So as I said earlier, I want to share 3 examples with you today as to how we are conducting reassessments. The first one I'm going to cover is concept-specific testing. And this is what I did following the building of the targets. So I want to remind you guys that we had clear targets, right? Now, when I got to the unit test, I look at my test cover. That's what it looked like. This is exactly it. Section 1, true and false. Section 2, fill in the blank. Multiple choice. How am I organizing my test? Well, knowledge, 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 knowledge. There's no question. And the other way I'm organizing it is by how it is constructed. And why? Because that's how I've always taken tests. That's what everybody did to me. And that doesn't make it wrong. It just means that's what I grew up seeing and learning and doing. And then, when it's all said and done, I give my students 1 percentage grade, a single percentage, for that test. It's as though you would go to your GP for a physical, And at the completion of your physical, heart rate, cholesterol level, murmurs, reflex, hit your knee, all that kind of thing, your doctor comes out and says you're 72% healthy. Right? Might be like, that's a little, I don't know about that. No, don't worry about it. 72% isn't bad. Yeah, I got some other people to see, so Mr. 72% healthy, be on your way. Okay? Maybe ride the bike a little more, but I can't give you much more information than that. We wouldn't accept that on our physical, and I don't know that we should accept that on learning outcomes. So, what did I do? Here's what I did. I could get into the details. I won't today. But I essentially built 2 versions of a test. I divided those tests by the essential learning outcomes. And what I mirrored the tests with was tracking sheets that when I give the test back to my students, they can track how well they did on each learning outcome. And then if you were to simply take the little step of putting those into your grade book as learning outcomes or even chunking the learning outcomes together, you would have a standards-based grading model. That's what they refer to by standards-based grading. It's not that complicated. No longer does my grade book read quiz out of 14. Test out of 48. No, it's by standards. I can always give a student the idea where you are on the standards. I can also ask students, did you do your homework? Have you done the pieces that we've talked about? If you were to get a retest on something, what would you do differently? And that's essentially the concept-specific grading model. Concept-specific testing, sorry. And there's lots of things I could get into with this. Is it automatic retesting for everyone? No. If someone isn't doing their homework, if they're not cooperating in class, that's a time to have a conversation and say, I don't know that you're doing everything to be successful right now. And if you want to, if we're going to talk about the real world, and I don't think schools have a good grasp on the real world, by the way, but if we are going to talk about the real world, it tends to be a give and take relationship. And I'm going to build a system that works for my students, but it must be both of us showing up to this and giving it our best shot. So I have found this to be very, very helpful. I typically allow 1 retest, not many of them. Sometimes I suggest to students, don't focus so much on the retest because you can't keep up with your regular courses right now. So these require conversations. There's no one-size-fits-all to every student. And the other thing I remind people is, who come up and say, yeah, but that one student who does this and that one student who does that, I have never designed a system for 1% of the population. This is what's good for most students. It's what the RTI model refers to as what we do for everybody in our system. And then we'll worry about, as it gets smaller and smaller, what we do in other interventions. So how about reassessment version 2? And I want to throw in, this is also a conversation about homework. Reassessment model 2 is concept-specific quizzing. What this involves is, and I run through it in my book, this is from Ben Arcuri, a chemistry teacher in Penticton. He has his students track their homework that they feel they should be doing or that he suggests, and they check off whether or not they did it. It is organized by the concepts in class, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and students track their own homework. Then, he has a quiz tracking sheet that corresponds to each of those topics. So he'll say, go home and do your homework. I have some examples on my website. We've covered this in class. I've gone over this with you. Now, I suggest you do this homework, because guess what's waiting for you tomorrow morning? A quiz on that topic. Suddenly, people don't have a lot of incentive to copy homework off each other because you need to demonstrate your understanding the next morning. Rather than bringing in homework and saying, here you go, and the teacher not knowing who did it, now you have a structured, safe environment for someone to demonstrate their learning. And you will notice that if that quiz doesn't go well, then you know who knows what and what supports they need, and they can come in for a re-quiz. And they're very small quizzes. Quick to grade, easy to give timely feedback. You can always write Ben Arcuri, B. Arcuri at summer.com and ask him as a senior chemistry teacher just how well this is working. Okay? And I believe he's in Portland at the ATI grading conference to share this summer. What happens is students track these things. 2 out of 6, 5 out of 6, they keep tracking their results on the quizzes. And it works really, really well. You will notice that Ben at the very bottom has 1 chance at a test. He is building his reassessment system based on quizzes. And once they get to the test, his senior chemistry students, he says, now it's time to show what you know. But you've had every chance to test, reassess. But when you get to the test, you should know it. I can't argue with that system. I think it's a nice balance between when and if. So let's talk about homework briefly. I know of teachers who spend entire Sunday afternoons grading a lot of work. And some of that work is work which people could just have the same answers in all the different lines. And I would ask them, do you want to grade assignments that were completed by other people? And if they say, yeah, I actually do. Yeah. Then I say, well, then you must despise your spare time. Yeah, I do. I'd rather grade reams of homework whose authenticity is questionable than to go out and ride my bike. Okay, have at her. I have bumped into homework clubs in our high school that involve someone being Monday and someone being Tuesday and someone else being Wednesday. Intricate systems by which one person does the homework, distributes it to the group, and boy, it's a system, all right. They understand the system. Is it right? Probably not. Is it ethical? Probably not. But some of these people go on to work with systems in the real world, and one of them is operating one of the largest grocery stores in the Okanagan. He understands systems. And I think we open, our current homework mantra opens us up to having people fabricate their homework. Have you bumped into this line? She gets good grades on projects and homework, but not on tests. Have you? I can tell you globally what the reason is people give for this. Why? Why does she get good grades on projects and homework, but not on tests? What is it? Anxiety. Test anxiety. It's brutal, right? This test anxiety is rampant. Epidemic proportions. Seemingly regular functioning students stricken with test anxiety on test day. You say, I swear that was the person who just did 7 jump serves in a row last night in front of half the community in the volleyball game. But now she's got test anxiety. I wonder why. Maybe because her friend is doing her physics homework and she gets to the physics test and does not know what she's doing and falls back on that reason. Now, let's be clear. There's probably a student sitting beside her who actually has test anxiety. And going, you know what, everybody around here seems to be claiming test anxiety. I actually have it. I think if we tweaked our homework methods, we would see less test anxiety. I think people need to be responsible for their own learning. And I think people need to work on homework and attach it to success on actual assessments. And that's when you see homework become quite effective. The third way that we're reassessing is this. It's called the pretest. Now, I was having a little bit of fun with the whole red campaign. You might recognize the logo. Here's where this comes from. There was a certain department in a school quite close to me where the consensus, well, the near consensus around the department table was, we don't offer retests. We are philosophically opposed to the retesting concept. There is no retest because a test is a test. One member of that department said, could I do a pre-test and then a test? Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. No. Yeah, I found it funny too. Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. Pre-tests are fine, but not a retest. Okay. So what this person did was, now I'm gonna, at first I laughed, but just wait. So now, the teacher I got this from, she has a rational numbers practice test. that is given 2 days before the regular test. She stopped doing the active study review that she used to grade as homework. And she said, 2 days before your Math 9 test, you come in and do a practice test. It's quiet. It's controlled in here. There's no talking. It's just like a test. You'll know exactly where you're at. And guess what happens if you do well in your practice test? Any guesses? No, don't do the regular test. They're virtually identical. Just like my test, switch up the questions, but you will know whether they know it or not. Same learning outcomes, same structure. And she says to me, Myron, I'm not doing any more grading than I did before, but I'm not tracking down homework, I'm not hounding kids for it, and I know exactly where my students are at on both of those assignments, rather than wondering who copied off who. What she also does is she uses a tracking sheet with all her learning outcomes on it. One color of check mark represents the practice test, or it can represent quizzes, and the other colored check marks represent the more recent assessment. And guess who's filling this out? Students. Tracking their own learning. And if anybody has picked up John Hattie's book, Visible Learning for Teachers, you might be reminded of what the number one effect on student achievement is. Student self-reported grades. Okay, number one, when you compile all the metadata on all the education studies he looked at. Number one, by far. There is self-efficacy that's coming up, I think, on his website, talking about it being 1 or 2 now, but it's right up there. Homework, by the way, is 94th. Anyway, the bottom line is, are these systems formative or summative in nature? It's a good question. I think you'd remove the question marks and recognize that it all depends on one thing. What are you going to do with the data? So you remember, in Rachel's practice test, the student looks at how they did on the practice test and makes the decision, am I going to do the real test? Well, they're looking at the data and they're making a decision. In my classroom tests, you look at the data and you make a decision. Do you do one section over again? Do you do many of them? In Ben's case, you look at the data and you make a decision. There are obvious forms of formative assessment, such as thumbs up, thumbs down, such as asking another human being, hey, does that make sense to you? And look for the head nod or whatever. That's formative. But when it comes to more structured assessments, this is what I wish we would do. Stop making 2 piles. These are my formative assessments, these are my summative assessments. Make one pile and say, those are my assessments. I determine formative and summative by what we do with the data. It's fluid. We react to it. So, let's go a little, maybe perhaps even deeper into the water. I thought I was done after all these stages. Now, okay, I got learning targets. Wonderful. Now I know how my students are doing on the targets. Great. They can even do something about that with a retest. Wonderful. And that's when I looked over through my grade book, and it suddenly didn't make a ton of sense to me. Why am I given zeros for work I didn't see? Why am I taking 10% off for something that's late? Because really what it's doing is it's messing up my data over here. Parent-teacher interviews that sound like this. So it says my daughter's at 68%. Well, she's actually higher. What do you mean? Well, she's missing a few assignments. So you believe she's actually a stronger student than 68%? Mm-hmm. And why is that in your grade book? Oh, missing some stuff. So what'd you give her on those? Zeros. Do you think she knows nothing about them? No. I bet she knows something about them. Then why are you saying 0? I don't know. Can we move on to a less difficult, less frustrating conversation? It doesn't make any sense. So I looked over at my grades and said, there's got to be another way of doing this. Okay, grades. And I realize this is where some of the most difficult conversations are. But I want you to know I didn't start with grading. I hope I have established that. So here's the first thing. if you go into a room or a space where there are 100,000 teachers, and you ask those teachers to write down one response to a question, and the question was this: what is the purpose of your grading and reporting? And they're like, what do you mean? Do you grade and report? Yes. What is your purpose doing that? And they say, okay, fine. They write it down. You take in all 100,000 responses, and according to Thomas Guskey, you will eventually make roughly 6 piles. You'll be like, okay, I saw this one before. It belongs there. I've seen this one, I swear. Oh yeah, it's over here. 6 piles. And the 6 piles will be like this. These are the type of things you will see. It's to communicate information about student achievement to parents and others. Nope. It's to provide information to students for self-evaluation. Others would say, no, we select or identify groups of students for programs. That's why we grade. Others would say incentives for students to learn, evaluate the effectiveness of programs, and the last pile would have something to do with demonstrating that people aren't responsible and can't take responsibility for their learning. Now here's what I'm going to give everybody, including those at the other schools. I'm going to give you 1 minute, and that's it. I own like 59, you own 1, sorry. 1 minute to look on that list and for yourself say, here's the 1 or 2 up there that I think are most important for me, and here's 1 or 2 that I think are the least important for me or not reasons why I grade and report. And have the briefest of conversations with someone beside you. So in other words, your top 2 and maybe your bottom 2 or 2 that you do not believe are reasons for grading and reporting. 1 minute, go. "15 seconds. I sound like the camera guys. Okay. Now, I would strongly recommend, and this is based on the work of Tom Guskey, this is his list. If you're going to look at report card reform, if you're going to look at grading policy, if you're going to look at assessment policy, the first question you need to cover is, why do we grade and report? Why do we put out report cards? What's the purpose of it? And if you find you have people all over the map as to what the purpose is, what do you think your chances are of agreeing on the rules? What are your chances? Not great. If you have someone who's rooted in number 1, I want to communicate the extent to which my students have achieved the learning outcomes, squaring off against somebody in number 6 who says, no, it's about showing responsibility. Good luck coming up with a set of rules you'll agree on. So this is step 1. Talk about purpose. While you're at it, you might want to talk about the purpose of homework. You might want to rewind the train all the way back and say, what's the purpose of an educator? Start there. You got to find some common ground and then move forward on the commonality of purpose. It doesn't have to be identical, but we should share some commonality. So you're like, okay, BC guy, what's your purpose for grading? Fine, I'll share it. Okay. If someone was to hop in the elevator and say, so do you grade and report? Yes, I do. You got 30 seconds. Why do you grade? I would say to reflect the extent to which a student has met the learning standard. That's why I grade. So then reporting is different? Slightly. They're very much related. Why do I report? I report in order to communicate to the student and those outside the classroom the extent to which the student has met the learning standards for a specified term. Okay? That's why I report. You haven't mentioned anything about like participation and how much they smile and whether they're nice. No, I haven't. I would build a concrete wall in my reporting and I would communicate separately those behaviors such as effort, attitude, participation, likelihood of smiling, bring in Kleenex boxes, all those kinds of things. Okay? Separate. And while we're at it, we should probably discuss what the best device is for reporting. Letter, performance scale, percentage, comment, what is it? You know, filling out Tim's report card? Tell his parents that he's 72% nice? It's kind of weird. Maybe that's a comment. And while we're on the topic of reporting, this is where you get into questionable grading rules, form a disconnect, perhaps, between what you say you want to do and what you're actually doing. A massive disconnect. And I see some pretty extreme examples on the road. Here's one I found online from Heritage Academy, where I might point out that they have high moral standards and academic excellence. And mixed into their academic excellence, if you bring in chickpeas, you can receive bonus points for bringing in those chickpeas, and you can apply those bonus points to a test or other assignment from that term. So the bringing in of canned food items can affect your grade. High moral integrity, academic excellence. Okay? Thanks for bringing in the Campbell's soup. Now, someone who's doing this, you'd say, what's your purpose? They would say, what? You don't think bringing in canned food for the food drive is a good idea? What kind of person are you, heartless soul? I'd say, no. I just think that maybe the purpose for grades does not include canned foods. I'm all for canned food drives. So this brings up a story about my son. My son Elijah. Okay, make this quick. My son Elijah has been struggling with remembering to brush his teeth. Okay, I don't know if anybody can relate to this problem. Many families face this problem. Would you please brush your teeth in the evening? So my wife gets involved and she's kind of squaring off because she's a little more persistent about the toothbrushing than I am. Okay? And I see that they're having this argument. I think to myself, there must be a rule. So I go to the rule book and the sheriff rolls into town and I say, Tracy, let me handle this. Okay? I am an educator. All right? I am well versed in these territories. Elijah, I understand you collect quarters. Is this correct? Yeah, Dad, I do. I have quite the quarter collection. Well, I got news for you, pal. It's going to cost you a quarter every evening that we have to remind you to brush your teeth. Say, what, a quarter every time? Yep. All right. Okay. And Elijah disappears around the corner. And I look over at my wife and I say, see, this is why. Teacher of the Year type material you're living with, right? The finest of educators, right here. You see me make up that rule on the spot? And the kid's brushing his teeth, you can almost hear him right now. And I can hear him rummaging around. He wasn't rummaging around for the toothbrush. He came around the corner, slapped 7 quarters on the table and said, I'm good for a week. She goes, Teacher of the Year, huh? You know what Elijah's pointing out? And I went on to write about this. I wrote an article based on that experience in education leadership. If you are going to use penalties, they've got to meet 4 criteria. And you've got to meet all of them. Number 1, you have to ask yourself, how often are you using it? And if it's every night, or your grade book is full of late deductions and zeros, guess what? It's not working. Building more prisons is not a sign that you are becoming more effective as a society. Number 2, Does it complement your overall ambitions? Are you achieving what you most want to achieve? Well, was I trying to financially benefit from my child's tooth decay? No. Okay, in that case, I don't think it's all that effective. Right? If someone says, I'm grading learning outcomes, well, does this rule, this zero rule, this minus 10%, does it achieve that? Well, not really. This one's awfully annoying. Does the student care? Anybody bumped into the non-caring student? Excuse me, where you're trying to impress upon them that they should care about the penalty that is set before them, and they don't? But none of those are as important as this. The last one. Is the student in control of the variables? This is a societal question. Do we apply penalties to students for variables that are beyond their control? I think we do. Did you know on recent study that 10% of students are the primary caregiver in the home? 10%. Could be because mom or dad have social emotional issues, could be alcoholism, could be anxiety, who knows? But they're getting their little brothers and sisters ready for school. They're putting them to bed. Do you think that would impact the extent to which you could do your homework? Absolutely. 10%. So 1 in 10 students. Eric Jensen writes about poverty. And I'm going to save you, although I think you should buy his book. It's a good book. The first 3 chapters, he highlights every impact on education that studies have shown exist in poverty, in students living in poverty. And I tried to fit them all on one screen. Here they are. Do you think it's fair to say that poverty would impact homework completion? I don't know how you could mount an argument any different than that. And as your eyes scan this list, you can look for things where you go, yeah, I've seen that before. Oh yeah, I've seen that too. You might see experience greater pedestrian risks. Never thought of that. Yeah, they get hit more often by cars. Something to think about. When you are building homework policies, this is something to think about. When you are discussing zeros in your school, that is something to think about. I'm not a fan of the term no zeros. It's been highly politicized, and I don't even agree with it. So I'd like to get rid of that term, and I would rather say that enacting blanket policies just avoids difficult conversations. That's what it does. And that's not my line, that's my principle. Chris Van Bergik said, you know, we're not a policy school. Because every time you bring in a policy, you're just trying to get away from a difficult conversation. Because if you say to someone, hey, you can't use zeros anymore, and someone said this to me when I was in Rio, they said, okay, fine, then I'll use 1%. See, that's the issue right there. Right? It's not about zeros. It's about, do we want to measure learning? Do we want to reflect learning in our reporting? And if you're going to discuss zeros, maybe this is an important thing to consider. Recent writing, Tom Guskey is one of them in the case against zeros. The whole concept of this zero argument would largely disappear if we switched to performance-based grading. Why? Because if you go to a performance scale, the zero is really no more powerful incrementally than any other digit. It's kind of how soccer works, frankly. We have no goals. So we kick it through that goal over there. Now we have 1. And we score again, we have 2. You don't need to score 5 goals to get your first point. But in a percentage-based grading system, those are all separated by 10 typically, but you have a 50-point separation from a 0 to the passing level. And I can't think of any other way to show it than to say this is the issue when you choose to average grades while using 0 in a percentage system. If you give someone a 0, who's got all kinds of issues at home or just has got a lot on their plate, it will take between 5 and 9 perfect scores to dig their way out of that impact. And you have to ask yourself if that's fair. Would you want that for your own son or daughter, is really the question. So where do people consider a 0? They consider a 0 when there's no answers correct, no demonstration of knowledge or understanding. They also say, well, I never saw it, we ran out of time. Or when people cheat or plagiarize or there's dishonesty. My question always is, when you look through your grade book, how can you tell the difference? What do zeros represent? Well, for that one, it was cheating. And for that one over there, the person never brought it in. This one here, the guy wrote the quiz, but he got none of them right. But you'd use the same digit for all those. That to me would be confusing. So my overall belief around zeros is they nullify or distort the grading I have done, and they do not reflect what students know. And if they do reflect what students know, you have an issue. But that's where I'm okay with a 0 being used for an actual assessment in a performance scale for a narrow band of learning. Fine. Use it. So someone says, you're okay with a 0? Yes, I am. If I give you a 3-question quiz on a concept we took yesterday, and you come back to me and say, man, I know nothing about this. What other number would you use? Since getting away from using zeros for everything, I've had so many requests like this. Can I please just have a 0? Because if you hold students accountable for actually doing the work, you will soon realize how much they've leaned on zeros to get out of doing that work in the past. And I am certain of it. One of the most powerful things I did ever was replace zeros with incompletes. And the most powerful way of doing it is to assign an incomplete in place of a grade and to render the entire course grade incomplete until those things are completed. That means you don't grade everything under the sun. It means you have some significant, meaningful assessments, and students must do all of them. And if a student says, well, what's my grade? You go, I don't know. Why not? Because you're not done. Does that mean I have to do it? Yes. Can I just have a 0? No. That would be easier for me, but I'm not willing to do that for you. What have we done instead? With the last few minutes we have, I want to show you a few things we've worked on. Here's one of them, incomplete assignment form. If you're in my class, here's how it sounds. Hey guys, I'm going to be grading these paragraph reflections this weekend. Would you please hand them in? By the way, if you have not got it completed, would you please go grab an incomplete assignment form? It's what you intend to do to get it finished. Okay, make sure you put your name and date on it and what the assignment is. Would you make sure to check off why you didn't get it done? And would you please indicate what you plan on doing to complete it? This is going to make a big difference to me on Sunday afternoon, because if your assignment paragraph isn't in there, I'm going to know why. Has anybody else ever got to Sunday afternoon and wondered where some of the student assignments are? And you can't remember who all told you what? Then Sally comes in on Monday and she fills out a late assignment form. You're going to be like, isn't that the same form? No, it's not. There's a little black box on this one. And in that box, students must indicate how many days late the assignment was. Anticipate, if you use this, anticipate students saying, yeah, I didn't put a number in the box. Would you please do it? We both know it's late. Yeah, I'll just leave that out. No, please put the number in. Listen, Mr. Dueck, we both know it's late. Okay? Do we really need to put the number in the box? Yes, we do. Why? Because let's track this. Did you know that globally water consumption goes down the moment you install a water meter, even if you don't charge more for the water? It's true. Minimum 10%. Globally. Wonder if that would work for tracking late assignments? We wanted to find out. So, Rachel let me film her binder where she tracks all her grade 9 and 11 late assignment forms, chronologically by student. This student, 13 days late. 9, 3, 1. It's not a matter of is it late or is it not. It's also a matter of what direction are you moving in. Recent studies indicate that 20 to 25% of human beings are chronic procrastinators. Human beings, not just students. Here's the bottom line. I think if we did this, we would probably have more accurate, justifiable, and reliable grades. But we just have to look for tools that make us successful in switching those things, moving them apart. Sorry for the American spelling on behaviors. Okay, last thing. We debated doing this, but this is one of my favorite tools. I know we're almost at the time. Give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Can I ask for 5 minutes? Okay. We, as a group, got together on multiple choice. And we had a question, like, this student, I get really stressed when I know I'm really close to the right answer. Okay, I have a question for you guys. Here's a multiple choice question. Which of the following... Get all excited. Oh, multiple choice. Some people say this guy should wind it back. All right. Which of the following people has the best chance of understanding a specific multiple choice question? There are 4 people. Just imagine there's a multiple choice question before you. Is it A, Mr. Crafty, the teacher who designed it? Is it B, Kim, the ESL student who sits beside Jimmy? Is it C, Rachel, the senior with anxiety and stress? Or D, Bobby, the eager hand raiser? Who is it? Who always has the best chance at understanding the multiple choice question? The teacher who designed it. And if you're like, I don't know about that, okay, I have a little homework assignment for you. Pick a course you have taught, show up on an exam day, and go have a little peruse over the questions of the multiple choice section and see if you are able to successfully answer all of them. This happened to me recently. I'm in the gym. Social Studies 9 is being written. A student puts her hand up, like, I've taught this course for 15 years. No problem. What's the problem? I got a question about this multiple choice thing. No problem. I've taught Social Studies 9 for 15 years. I'm the guy. I don't know. I'm with you on that. 2 spelling errors. Yeah, big C. 2 spelling errors. 2 answers that are arguably both correct, right? Contextual, historical significance. I completely debate whether that's even the case, but it's a multiple choice question. So what did we do? We came up with something called I know I'm close multiple choice. Here's how it works. You can choose to answer both of those things you're wondering about. You're wondering about A and you're wondering about C? Choose them both. But you must provide an explanation as to why you're doing so. All right? It comes in 2 formats. One you can use with a Scantron and simply have the pile available for a student to come over and say, I need a lifeline here. We got a problem question. Or I know all about this, but I don't think it's just one response. And there's the conventional one where you put the choice in and you choose something that goes with it. Okay? So I have to do it. I have to show you guys this one. Sorry, I cannot go without it. Here. I have here it is. True story. Here it is. Here's the history. Well, this is a true story. Germany did invade France in 1914. They went through Belgium. They caused all sorts of destruction, okay? Then they just had to decide what are we going to do with the Saar coal region. President Wilson arrived in 1919 in Paris, and he said, here's the deal. Germany keeps the land because there's Germans living there. It's called self-determination, one of his 14 points. But you know what? France gets the coal for 5 years because they have all the trenches and all the destruction in their land. And I taught my students this. Then I went and used a question that went through the formation, then a review committee, then a second review committee for History 12 exams in BC. Here's the question. Good luck. After 1919, Which country controlled the Saar coal region? USA, Japan, Germany, France. And by the way, there's only one correct answer, supposedly. Which is likely the only country we can remove with any degree of safety? Take out Japan, right? There it goes. Because what information do you need in the STEM to help you answer the rest? How long after? 5 years or more. What exactly do you mean by controlled? And are you talking the country, the resources? What do you mean by region? I need more info. This is a tool that has made a huge difference, where you now see a student take number 2, say Germany, France, and go down there and put number 2 in and say Germany owned it, but France had temporary control over it. Bingo. We've just taken multiple choice, arguably one of the most difficult questioning formats and one of the most questionable questioning formats, and then just gone up Bloom's taxonomy a little ways and said, okay, fine, reason your way through it. The last tool is this, and I'm going to leave it at that, and I got 1 minute of my extra time. Apparently, I'm not into figure skating, I don't know how it works, but apparently in the free skate, you can't just go out and do whatever you want. Don't you need to give the judges your plan? That's what I heard. So they say, hey, get as creative as you want, but let us know the plan. And what I did in my classroom is this. I wanted to build a template so that when it comes to creative assignments, get as creative as you want, but let's keep our eye on the learning outcomes, and I need to know the plan. So what I designed was this, the major project planning sheet. I preloaded all the learning outcomes from the unit down one side. I asked the student to tell me, where am I going to find those learning outcomes? And would you please give me a little bit of information as to what you're going to research? And Eric, for example, said, I want to build a tank model. Here's the learning outcomes. I guess I got to follow the learning outcomes. Oh, yeah, you needed to follow the learning outcomes. Not all of them, the ones you're interested in. I'm going to make a tank model, and I guess I need to include a write-up so I cover some of these things. Yeah, I think you do. Okay, here's my research. I would go along and I would just sign the bottom and say, start on your project. Looks good. And that's where you get things that go beyond writing on lines with pen and paper, because there's more to demonstrating knowledge than that. Bottom line, you guys, is this. I think we can open the portal for creativity. Learning is unavoidable. Empower teachers to recognize it, okay? The map is this. Targets, assessments, improve your instruction, and maybe along the way you look at your grades. But regardless, it'll take more than putting a sticker on something to call it progressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Myron for sharing your thoughts and your practical work with us today. Thank you to all of you for sharing in this learning experience. We do hope that the content today prompts continued thinking and continued dialogue as each of us as teachers continue along our assessment journey in our practice. And we'll just engage for a few minutes in question and answer dialogue, so certainly you're welcome to continue on. Wishing you well.
Yeah, so I'd gladly take questions here or any other comments. I mean, I've done a lot of talking. If there's a way that people would be able to stay online on the broadcast and send those or text you questions, I'd take them from anywhere. So questions or comments, good, bad, stuff you might struggle with, anything. Can't take everybody at once though, just one at a time, okay? Don't go crazy here. Random questions are fine.
Like all of this, I totally agree 100%. But I think half the problem that we have as teachers or as administrators is, at what point do we hold the students accountable?
Okay, so can I paraphrase your question?
Sure can.
You did suggest that you were on board with this, you don't have a big problem with it, like it. At what point do we hold students accountable?
I guess done is not an option.
Yeah.
That I would always wait until it was done, but I think it's a bigger picture. Sometimes teachers say we don't have enough time to wait until.
Yeah.
Do we
Okay.
give them deadlines? Do we
Yep.
give them-
Let's be clear. I am in favor of deadlines. I am in favor of holding students accountable, which is a great question. What I used as a format in my own classroom was a 2-day rule. If something is behind more than 2 days, we start enacting the interventions. This is not about saying wait forever to hand things in and whenever you get around to it, hand it in. It's probably the number one thing I bump into as far as an argument. People saying, I'm going to get a landslide of assignments on my lap. Yes, if you wait for that to happen, you will. My experience is it'll be that way in any area in life. If you don't put things in place for people to have a structure for handing it in, you'll get swamped. And no offense to the teachers I've worked with, it's the same thing with award nominations in our school. It's the same thing with report cards. It is a human condition that there are people who will wait as long as possible. That's a fact. So for students, things we've done is after 2 days, or whenever the teacher believes it's time, we had a homework room run at lunch, and Tuesdays and Thursdays after school in the library, where teachers would fill out a form saying, Sam really needs to come there and get this project done. We need to provide some support, okay? What we did in the library on those days, and I ran it on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:15 to 4, is we provided a snack halfway through. And a lot of our at-risk students came by and just started using that as a homework room and homework support. Many of the teachers that were very frustrated with the non-grading of homework said, well, what systems are we going to put in place to replace that? Well, we need to, right? And the homework room was very important. We ran a Saturday school every 10 weeks. We've, what else did we do? We had an EA that went around at Penticton Secondary. We took one of our educational assistants and we paid for the morning on her time to take every homework referral and get to every student in the school who had a referral and remind them that we'd see them in room 209 at lunch or in the library on Tuesday or Thursday and have them sign off which one they would be at. If they don't show up, it's a discipline referral to moi. What would I do? Walk around frustrated. No, I would, that's when I would call the parent and see if we can get the parent on board with this homework support. I'd go visit the student. And all we did was with that same triangle, it became fewer and fewer and fewer students. Were there some of the student population that I said, that is not the student to keep in at lunch doing homework? Whatever poor soul of a teacher gets that student after lunch is done if we keep that person in all lunchtime as well. You have to factor who you're dealing with. Those are some of the things, okay? I do not believe in endless deadlines, do it whenever. Anybody else? Yes?
Question from Twitter, Cardinal Collins. What are your thoughts, multiple means of representation for summative assignment?
Question on Twitter is what's my feeling on multiple ways of demonstrating knowledge on a summative assignment? I'm hugely in favor of it. I didn't show one today, but I have an oral response form. It would probably be difficult. No, I can find it. No, it's not my computer. It's in the package. Yeah. There's an oral response form in the package where there's times where a student, it isn't their day to write necessarily. And I'm going to spare you the whole story, but I designed it after a student came by saying, I can't write this today. They did the multiple choice. They did all the other parts. They got to the final big response on why Britain had been successful in the Battle of Britain. And they said, sorry, I'm not there today mentally for this. I go, what's going on? My parents are splitting up. I'm couch surfing at a buddy's place. My girlfriend and I are breaking up. I think I'm getting my butt kicked after school. I'm not writing today. We had just purchased an iPod Classic with a microphone attachment that we keep in a little plastic Pelican case, indestructible. And all we say to the student is, would you mind taking 1 minute after everybody leaves and just tell in 1 minute what you know about that? Yeah, I could do that. Okay. So then I took the form and even listened to it after class and just checked it off, right? also made the form that forget recording it. Just have someone come up and say, okay, with this form I can track the important terms you say and check off excellent, not so good, so on, and score it later. I know students who, instead of a final exam, Russ Reed at Penticton Secondary does a week of show what you know. One day they watch a movie and says, I want you to pick out 5 geographical concepts we took in this course while you watch this movie. That's it. That's part of your assessment. He said, I want my students to recognize geography in a movie they watch. They can see this course and what we did. The next day they do a case study. The day after that, he puts a piece of paper down and says, I want you to design a t-shirt, I want you to design a cartoon, I want you to design something that fits this concept. And every day the students have something, he calls it a week. Shona Becker in our school calls it a celebration of learning in the final week of the course. There's so many ways of showing what you know, and they can be used summatively. You can't tell me teachers can't recognize learning outcomes. They're just there. You just got to see them. Anybody else? I want to say, yeah.
When you first switched to using the outcomes as kind of a way of dividing these things up, did that take quite a bit of rethinking of exams and that sort of thing, or was it?
Yeah, you know what I did? It's a great question. Two things definitely took front-loading time. One is sitting down to make those unit plans. Like they don't come out of nothing. And I have to emphasize, the first one took the longest. Then you get a little better, and a little better, and a little better. And after a while, you're firing learning outcomes into places like you're getting better at, right? You just practiced in it. The other thing I did with the gentleman named Russ that I mentioned, we were teaching the same course in Socials 11. We followed a similar syllabus in our courses. So I said, why don't I do all the even-numbered units, and you do the odd ones, and let's share those documents, okay? Then when it comes to the tests, really what I did is I took all my questions, in a way I pooled them, right? Page 1 became all these learning outcomes, right? And I took, for that learning outcome, these questions there, then these, then these. My sections became a mishmash of formats on the first one, okay? So, because if I took all the, let's just say true and false, not that I'm a big fan of true and false, but you take those that meet this topic and you put them over in that section. And you go take that diagram that moved to that section. A student would sit down and it's the same topic, but a multitude of different questions initially. Because all I did was drag them to the places they belonged. And it wasn't that taxing at all. And then as I went along, I refined that, you know, to maybe get more consistent in the type of question and so on. But many of my tests are still a mishmash of formats, are a combination of formats. Does that answer it? I'll take as many. I think I fly at 7, so I can take questions till 6:15 or so. Okay, my final comment is this. We don't have it all together at Summerland Secondary. We don't have universal agreement on what to do with grading and assessment. It isn't Narnia, okay? We are on a road to trying to figure this out, and I'm committed to that. And the ground moves beneath our feet a little bit, and we're also becoming comfortable with that too. But if I would never want to come up here and say, I think we have all the answers, but I hope that by sharing some of the tools, it's been beneficial today. So thank you very much.